Towson, Baltimore, from a baseball perspective, were a couple of runaway races in the American League West with Houston, and of course down the road where the Washington Nationals are sort of building their little cushion in the National League East as well. This guy's out in the Midwest where everybody just thought the Chicago Cubs were going to run away with things in the Central. That is not the case, and of course we're entertaining the Pirates this week, so we'll get a little taste of that NL Central and interleague play. He is Seth Gruen. He does all things baseball as well as some Big Ten and some podcasting out in the Windy City. You can follow his journey out at Bleacher Report or at Seth Gruen on Twitter, one of our defending champions. Boy, this American League East, Seth, interesting over the weekend. The Orioles take a couple, then lose a couple. I think everyone is waiting to see what the Yankees are going to wind up doing here over the next 6 weeks, but they don't show any signs of cooling down either, right?
No, and I think this was honestly pretty predictable. You and I talked about in the offseason and in spring training about how this division was probably going to be the most competitive in baseball and was going to offer us some of the greatest theater of this baseball season. And I don't think it's disappointed between some of the off-the-field things and some of the stuff that's transpired on the field. I certainly think that this division is going to be hotly contested between the three aforementioned teams. And certainly, I don't believe that the Yankees are going to cool down. They were my World Series pick out of the American League to start the season, and I have no reason to back off that now.
Why did you like I like the Yankees too, and I don't remember talking to many people at all that believed the Yankees were the class of the division. Many people thought the Red Sox were the class of all of baseball, quite frankly.
Yeah, well, look, I never thought that, or I wasn't necessarily certain that they would win the division, but, I felt like that was a team that's going to find itself in the playoffs, whether it be winning the American League East or via wild card. And certainly felt like, similar to the way the Cubs did it last year, have the moxie and the confidence to go out and string together some wins in October. And I think sort of the Cubs model is a little bit of a head turn for baseball fans because you think, okay, young team needs to get some playoff experience, but I think there's something to be said about ignorance and that may be an advantageous aspect to this Yankees ball club because a lot of their key guys obviously don't have experience, but boy, oh boy, are they talented. I mean, that was really what I fell back on. I mean, when you look at all the talent that they have, all the young talent they have in that lineup, and what they could possibly have coming, I thought it was hard to ignore them.
They're going to be an interesting case once you get to July 28th, 29th, 30th as to what's on the market because more than any other team in baseball, not only can they take on money and salary, for a couple of weeks or take on a contract that may have another year left on it, they have the kind of prospects, much like in the offseason, out in Chicago, Chris Sale dealt off to the Red Sox. The reason the Red Sox got Chris Sale wasn't just the money. It was they had the talent, they had Moncada, they had players, Benintendi coming up, that could make that deal work for them. I think the Yankees are in a position in July to pretty much do whatever they want to do financially, deal-wise, and whatever's out on the market. It will be interesting to see if they actually do that, if they feel like they need to augment this team right now.
Yeah, well, I think from the other side, whenever you're a buyer, it's a little bit difficult, and it's not an exact science as to when you should actually pull the trigger on a trade, particularly a big arm, because quite often the best deals in terms of sellers are done in the offseason. That's why we saw the White Sox trade Chris Sale over the winter. I think there'll be some pitching available at the trading deadline, which is obviously an advantage to anybody looking for it, and the Yankees are definitely one of those teams. I felt like at the beginning of the year, knowing that Jose Quintana at some point will be traded, felt like the Yankees were the best trade partner for the White Sox simply because, and you alluded to it, the Yankees have a lot of bats in their system, and that's what the White Sox are looking for. So I think when you look at Quintana in particular, who despite his struggles this season, I still believe will be one of the big names mentioned in and around the trade deadline, the Yankees are going to be major players for him, just simply because, you said, they have the currency, not only in prospects, but in the type of prospects, and I'm talking about position players, that the White Sox are looking for.
The other issue going into the trading deadline is there are 10 teams right now we can name that have no chance, right? I mean, the 4 teams in the National League East, chasing Washington, they're going nowhere. It appears as though the 4 teams in the AL West, and maybe a case can be made on the wild card side for the Angels or for Seattle, maybe even for Texas at this point. But by and large, those 8 teams plus San Diego and San Francisco, they're kind of done, right? So, those teams, for whatever players they have of value, there will be a market set for all of those franchises for existing contracts, right?
Yeah, for sure. I think if those teams choose to sell, I'm still not convinced that the Rangers are down and out. I think that's a team that could, in large, I think your statement's correct. Those teams might be looking to move some players, get some prospects, get younger, which, again, makes the buyer's market a lot more advantageous. So I think if you're a team that's going to be looking to add, you may not need to give up the haul of prospects we saw teams give up last year in some of these big deals, just because I don't think the quality of players or as much quality was available last year as it was this year. Certainly not as far as starting pitching is concerned.
As much as we got a cat fight here in Baltimore with the Yankees, and we'll see them this weekend, as well as the Red Sox and others, even Toronto has sort of gotten themselves back into this thing at this point. There's nothing quite like what the Houston Astros are doing, and I know you've been a guest here for a number of years, and last year in the offseason, I was doing the dollar bet saying, all right, if I gave you $1 and said put it on a team to make the playoffs, the Astros were my team. They never got there. They got an awful start last year. What we're seeing here over the last month, where they really put the pedal down, and they're going weeks at a time without losing baseball games. This is really sort of rarefied air, not just for this franchise, but for any team playing 720 ball in June.
Well, yeah, and you can't sustain that. I think we saw that with the Cubs last year when they were on a tear early in the year and then played sub-500 baseball in July. The Astros are going to come back down to earth, but I think I've said it before, no team did more for itself this offseason than the Astros did at Ray Beltran. But I think also they've got their ace back. Dallas Keuchel was absolutely brutal at this time last year. And while, look, every pitcher is sort of in his own individual world and he can only control what he does on the mound, I think that when your ace is struggling and when the guy you're counting on to deliver quality starts basically every time he takes the mound is struggling, it has a residual effect, not only on the rotation, but obviously on the bullpen. I think it puts more pressure on your 2, 3, 4, and 5 pitchers who obviously aren't as good, and you're forcing them to go deeper into games, something they may not be comfortable with or may not be capable of, and it also taxes your bullpen. So there's certainly a domino effect to a player like that not delivering, and I think that the fact that he's returned to form, the form we saw in 2015 when they won the wild card or made the wild card, I think that that has helped them supremely.
You talked about the great race in the American League East. We expect that to continue on. I don't think anybody expected a race in the NL Central or even the AL Central, right? I mean, it was Cleveland, it was the Cubs. They were going to run away. They were going to hide. But here we are getting into the dog days now, and no one's running away and hiding. And I'll tell you what, tip the cap to Minnesota. It's what Paul Molitor's done there. Tip the cap out in Milwaukee, what Craig Counsell's done out there. These are the surprise teams, and I think that's one of the things that makes baseball such a beautiful thing, right?
Yeah, I completely agree, and that's why it's 162 games. I think when all is said and done, you'll probably see Cleveland and the Cubs winning both those divisions. But do they? I think what's missing from both those clubs is a little bit of the magic from last year, and a lot of that magic, as far as both clubs are concerned, came from their starting staffs, and their starting staffs just aren't as good this year as they were last year. So I think there's some commonality between those two teams. You mentioned the Twins. That's an unusual case, in my opinion. I mean, when you think about where they were a couple seasons ago, and they looked like they were on the precipice of really going on a nice little run here in the AL Central, and then a lot of their young prospects just didn't deliver. It was really unusual because I think there was a lot of buzz surrounding that club. In terms of the Brewers, I have to say I think David Stearns is one of the finest GMs in the game. I think what he's done in building up that Cleveland farm system is as good a job as any general manager short of Theo Epstein has done. I think that this is a team you expected to take a step this year. This big a step, probably not. But you don't just flip a switch and all of a sudden start contending it just because you've loaded up your system with prospects. Again, I've said it before, I'll say it again. What happened to the Cubs is highly unusual, and that happened at an accelerated rate. But usually it's gradual, and I think that what's going on with Milwaukee right now is a stop along the way to ultimately contending for division titles and wild card spots, despite the fact that there's a young Cubs team in that division.
What's happened to Arrieta out there? I haven't seen a lot of the Cubs starts. I'm sitting here watching baseball and basketball and hockey and whatnot. Every time I look up, I'm expecting 8 innings and 2 hits and something special. Hadn't been a whole lot of that so far. Not for him, not for Hendricks, or for Lester. I mean, they've kind of struggled collectively, even though they've augmented that bullpen, and the bullpen's fine.
And Lackey.
Yeah,
sure. Yeah. I think they're having all sorts of problems with the pitching staff. C.J. Edwards and Wade Davis have been good on the back end. But, to answer your question about Arrieta, number one, I think, again, hats off to Theo Epstein and his staff. They seem to have predicted this because they did not want to negotiate with Arrieta long term. I think when you look at the success he had in the Cy Young year, beginning of last year and whatnot, it's an end of 2015. It was sort of a flash in the pan when you look at the rest of his career. I mean, I don't think anybody can sustain that kind of pace.
By the way, we looked at the rest of his career, so I agree with you.
Right. Yes, that's true. I forgot Baltimore.
Yeah, we watched the rest of his career.
Yeah, I think that he's not that player. He's probably not an ace. I think we've seen him lose velocity. He's a guy that likes to use the full extent of the count, so he's going to run his pitch counts high. I think also when you run your pitch counts that high, you got to be able to blow by people, and he can't blow by people right now or as efficiently as he did a season ago. So I just think we're seeing what the real Jake Arrieta is, and that's probably more like a 2 or even 3 number 3 starter. I don't think he's as bad as he was in Baltimore. I think the Orioles have, and we could talk about this another time, have an unusual way of dealing with their pitchers, and we've seen that a little bit with the evolution of Dylan Bundy, who's gone back to some old mechanics. And
we've seen that with the de-evolution of Gausman right now as well.
Yeah. I mean, we could do a whole segment on that, but nonetheless, I don't think that's the true Jake Arrieta, but I think what we're seeing right now is probably a little bit closer to that, and certainly why the Cubs didn't want to engage in long-term contract negotiations with him.
Thank God for arbitration eligible for him, right? I mean, that was the way he got paid, right?
Yeah. Look, that happens, and I think we saw that a little bit with Matt Harvey, and obviously he's a whole other circumstance. But,
well, so are the Mets. I mean, the Mets might be the most mismanaged pitching you could think of in modern times, right? I mean, they've gone from penthouse to outhouse and incredibly quickly, right?
Look, tough to say. I'm not necessarily – look, given the uncertainty surrounding a pitching arm, right, it's the most fragile and unknown commodity in sports, at least from a standpoint of health. I can't sit here and blame management for Matt Harvey getting thoracic outlet syndrome, or for Noah Syndergaard last year getting bone spurs. I understand that they've had injuries en masse, and it's really unusual, even with pitchers, to see this number of injuries with the starting staff. But look, we saw it here in Chicago with the Cubs and Kerry Wood and Mark Pryor. So it's not unheard of, and I think until we get more data and understand these things a little bit more, which may take another decade, if not more, it's difficult for me to lay blame exclusively with management.
Last thing for you. I want to talk about the Colorado Rockies, at least briefly. I was out in Denver for 4 days last week, rolling around with my wife. I didn't even know the Rockies were still in the big leagues, quite frankly. And not only that, they're in first place, and people were actually walking around with Rocky stuff. I went to see Tom Petty out of Red Rocks. People had said, hey, I was at the baseball game today on Memorial Day. And I'm thinking to myself, wow, the Rockies are really growing into something here. And more than that, for 20 years, they've tried to find some semblance of pitching or someone that could keep the ball in the ballpark there and keep ERAs down. I don't know how sustainable it is given the thin air, and I couldn't breathe up in the mountains either. But boy, this is their breakthrough year that we've been talking about for a number of years, right?
Yeah, number one, great venue in terms of fan experience. I was there last summer, and I think anybody who's out in Denver who's a baseball fan should try to get out and watch a game there. As far as the Rockies are concerned, yeah, look, I think that you could make an argument that no franchise in sports is more, no professional franchise at least, is more disadvantaged within their own particular league than the Colorado Rockies, because it's going to be really, really hard for them to sign big-time pitching free agents. And I think people have made this argument. I heard Lou Piniella make it, and it may sound outlandish, but look, I agree that at some point Colorado may want to consider just, having 12, 13 relievers out there and just pitching each game as a bullpen game. And having some long relievers capable of starting, because it's just so difficult, like you said, to keep the ball down there. And so many pitchers can become overtaxed, and, it's just really, really difficult to have success.
Well, it messes with your head. I mean, you go ask Denny Nagel or Mike Hampton, right?
Yeah, Mike Hampton's a perfect example. So, I think at the end of the day, yeah, what they're doing now is really impressive, obviously. I don't think it's a team that will never contend, but I think they have more difficulty than anyone in the game right now.
He is Seth Gruen. You can follow his journey at Bleacher Report as well as on Twitter at Seth Gruen. He's also doing some Big Ten podcasting out off of his Twitter site as well, and you can go find him. He is one of our defending champions. We'll check back in a little closer to the All-Star game, Seth. Luke and I are actually going down to Miami and going to do a little All-Star game turn down there in that blimpy dump at the foot of Little Havana.
Oh, awesome. Enjoy that then.
Sunshine and baseball. It doesn't get any better than that, and that sort of crazy outfield wall out there as well. Seth, be well, man. We'll check in again soon.
All right.
Seth Gruen joining us here from Bleacher Report. You can follow him at Seth Gruen. That's Gruen out on Twitter from the Windy City in the Chicagoland area. You can find me out in the Bay at Toyota Audio Vault 24 hours a day from anywhere in the world on your mobile device. Just download the TuneIn Radio app. We do come in crystal clear. It is bikini season. Get on out to Planet Fitness, where it's still $10 a month to get in the best shape of your life. They sponsor our morning newspaper and power that up. You can sign up for free up at WNST.net, and you get our paper at 7 a.m. each and every morning digitally to your email inbox with all the box scores, standings, news, blogs, video, audio, all that good stuff for you at WNST.net. Breaking news happens first on the WNST tech service on your mobile device. It's all brought to you by Coons Ford of Security Boulevard, and Dennis Colatzos will be here on Thursday driving you home from 3 until 5 with the SSV on WNST. Much like Mr. Angelos, I'm a very available individual. Speaking of Mr. Angelos, the Peter Principles, I've been re-editing from when I was writing about it before my wife contracted leukemia the first time in 2014. I put the book down 3.5 years ago. I have since picked it up. I will be releasing it all summer long out at WNST.net. The hashtag is The Peter Principles, and that's principle with an L-E, not an A-L, because, it's always the principle of the matter anyway. You can also find me and that out on Facebook, Twitter, LinkedIn, Snapchat, Instagram, and we also stream live on our Facebook Live as well as our YouTube WNSTV channel. I am Nestor. We are WNST.net, AM 1570, and WNST Towson, Baltimore, and we never stop talking Baltimore sports.